It's ridiculous. We're getting close, Dave.
Are you going to do a little intro or?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
It's based upon your bio stuff. I
Okay,
just adapted
excellent.
it slightly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Two, two. One, two. Yep. Two, three. We're just about ready, John. Just stand by.
Yep. Okay, that's pretty hot. Woo. Hot, hot, hot. Okay, that's better.
Everyone's really quiet when we're standing by, eh?
Good job.
Still standing by.
Mm-hmm.
John, can you just say a few words just to make sure we're getting your mic there?
Hello, 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 hello. How's that? Pretty good? Pretty good? Keep talking, talkity chalk,
Yeah.
yakety yak.
That's great.
Okay, great.
Still standing by for 1 second,
Mm-hmm.
and then now it'll be go time.
Yep. Okay. Hello and welcome to today's Carleton Music Masterclass, Stage, Page, and Sonics, featuring Sage Reynolds. Ottawa-based composer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, vocalist, producer, sound designer, and samplist, Sage Reynolds works in a wide range of musical styles and contexts. These include jazz, folk, indie rock, country and bluegrass, cinematic music, media composition, sample development, and sound design for the theater. His training consists of a Bachelor of Music in Performance from McGill University and private study, as well as participation in many master classes, workshops, and seminars. Sage has performed or recorded with Thomas Hellman, Jordan Officer, the Sage Reynolds Quartet, Emily Klepper, Andrea Lindsay, the Canadian indie rock darlings Stars, Eamon Tobin, Guy Belanger, Rick Howarth, and the great Bella Fleck, as well as country music singing star Don Tyler Watson. He has toured extensively, performing on national and international stages, including Montreal Jazz Festival, Ottawa and Vancouver International Jazz Festivals, Merida Jazz Festival International in Mexico, the Folk Alliance Conference in Austin, Texas. Sage was awarded the Prix Étoile Galaxie de Radio Canada Composition Prize in 2005. For nearly 15 years, Sage has taught at Concordia University and at the McGill Conservatory of Music. Other activities include freelance gigging and studio session work on albums, film, TV, and voice acting. Current projects include an acoustic indie folk songwriting project under his own name, an EP with Life in Winter, and a cinematic string quartet composition project funded by the Canada Council for the Arts. Welcome, Sage.
Thanks so much. That was an improvised double bass piece. I'm going to continue with a jazz piece called Beautiful Love. Thank you. Such a nice, quiet room here. Beautiful. Thanks to John for the introduction and for the invitation to be here today. It's a real pleasure. Done a few of these over the years, but not for a while, so it's really cool. There's a lot of things that haven't happened in the last few years, so it's nice to be in a room with people and improvising, doing various things. As John said, my name is Sage Reynolds, and I do a lot of different things, as he listed off there. Got that slide going here. So the first section I'm going to talk about is essentially performance, and one of the main things I've done over the last 25 years is perform on stages. So stage, still one of my favorite things to do, and a way to connect with people, a way to be present with audience members as well as the people you're collaborating with on stage, a way to travel. So that's the first section, stage. This shot, by the way, is in a beautiful theater in Paris when I was on tour. So as John listed, here's some of the things I do. Musician, artist, right? It's sometimes people shy away from the term artist, but I think it's okay to own that title. Bassist's the main instrument I play, double bass, also electric bass. Composer is a huge part of my artistic identity. Arranging is amazing. Singer-songwriter, talk about that later too. And then over the years, I've picked up various other instruments, guitar, piano, mandolin, recently marimba. I'll talk about that a bit too. And then I also produce music. I'm a technician in terms of sound recording, sound engineer, sound editing, and sound design. And sound design, I'll talk about that as well. And recently sampling. And on top of all that, I'm an educator as well. So I teach private lessons recently online, but also in person for any of the things that I specialize in. But I also teach double bass and electric bass at Concordia University. And up until this fall, at the conservatory, McGill Conservatory of Music, teaching jazz ensembles. And after, I think, 117 years or something, the conservatory closed this year. So it's a bit unfortunate. But there's some other programs in the city in Montreal that are starting up with to continue some of those programs that the conservatory had. All right, so I live here now. I work here. I also work in Montreal. I grew up in Ottawa, right around the corner from this beautiful Victorian building here. And so, you know, I played a little bit of clarinet in junior high. It was horrible. And at Glashan, I'm not sure if anyone went to Glashan, but went to Glebe for high school. And in grade 10, one of my friends was playing guitar, and he's like, "Oh, you should play bass. We'll start a band." So I was like, "Okay, sure." So really cool thing, though, is our band, we had a basement jam space in my friend's basement, and we built a studio over the course of a few years. So we're actually recording ourselves and jamming and recording and writing music. So that was a really great start. The other great start was right away I started taking private lessons with Kurt Walters, who's a great Ottawa bass player, guitar player, musician in general, and great educator. And later on, Jordan O'Connor for double bass and jazz specialization. So within that time, I started doing some gigging in Ottawa as well. And I was just sort of getting into jazz, but I wasn't doing a lot of gigging on jazz, but I was playing some country music. And so my first gig was actually at Irene's on Bank Street with Lonesome Paul, who's an excellent country singer. And that was great. Fred Guillon, guitar often. And you know, he would never tell me, he would maybe tell me the key of the song, but never tell me what the chord changes were. It would just go. And I'd learn the song on the spot. So it was a great education on the stage. And, you know, being 18, 19 years old and playing in bars, and it was pretty interesting. So I was gearing up to do architecture in university. My last year of high school, I was thinking about, okay, well, I'm applying for universities, maybe even Carleton. And at the last minute, I was like, well, do I really love this? And I'd done co-op at an architecture firm, and I realized that it would be very interesting, but it was also not as immediate as making music, which I was already doing or had been doing for several years. So I switched gears last minute, and I practiced really hard, lots of hours, and applied at several different universities, and I got in at a few, and I decided to go to McGill for jazz performance. So that's the next stage. So this is a shot off the mountain, which is one of my favorite parts of Montreal, and looking down at Mile End, which is a neighborhood I lived in a lot. And it's also very similar to the album cover of one of my albums. So 95, I moved to McGill, Montreal. I'd spent a lot of time there as a kid, going to Expos games and hanging out with my sister and loving the music scene there. McGill was really intense, but really a great learning experience. And it was very old school at the time when I was there. The teaching style was very different than it is now. But I learned a lot, made a lot of great connections, learned how to organize myself, which is one of the best things about going to university. And yeah, those connections, those hours on my instrument, all the theory I learned, the ear training, it was all very valuable. And then, you know, we also started doing master classes, or I started attending master classes like this at McGill, and different players would come from out of town and come in and talk with us, and we get to play with them a bit, which you'll see we'll get to do that later on, and found that was really interesting. Also, started taking private lessons with teachers outside of the university in New York City and various places, and teachers who would come to Montreal sometimes. And also went to the Banff Center for the Arts for the jazz program, which was amazing. And there are lots of great teachers there. So that was my main training. And then about second year university, as was wont to happen, is gigs started happening. I started to get asked to play gigs. So my very first gig in Montreal was in a frozen replication, like to scale of the Parthenon, I believe. No, the Pantheon. And they'd built it on McGill campus out of ice. And it was about -4, -5, and we're a jazz group from from the music department playing in this Frozen things. I had gloves on, I think, and that was my first gig in Montreal. Anyways, from there it continued swing bands. There was a bit of a swing revival in the 90s, which is going strong now as well, but some of my first gigs were playing in a swing band. And about the same time I started doing session work. So I was talking earlier that at McGill they have a great sound engineering program. So the students there often need other students to record. So we started doing session work at McGill, and that transitioned very easily into doing session work in the professional community. And that's continued to this day and is a very enjoyable part of my work. So finished up university, was gigging, but had some student debt and wanted to travel. So, and we didn't know about how bad cruise ships were for the environment at that time, or I didn't anyways, but I decided to go on the ship for a few years. So traveled the world, playing in a ballroom dance band. We also would back up show singers, and worked on my sight reading a lot, reading charts on the bandstand, and singing jazz standards, which was really fun when I was a band leader. So Alaska, Central America, Southeast Asia. So even though I wouldn't do that today, it was a very valuable experience, and I recommend trying to travel with music if you are a musician, if you can, even if it's just to the city next door. So after the cruise ship years, I became sort of a bit disconnected with Montreal because I'd been away a bunch and it was hard. I was losing my gigs. So I decided to take a year away, and I went to Whistler, and I was a DJ and snowboarded for a winter and a DJ at an après ski bar, and moved down to Vancouver for the summer, which was beautiful, and played with some musicians there. And then, but it wasn't really happening. So I decided to move back to Montreal. And that move back made me realize how strong the community I had and still have is in Montreal, and how much I'd built that community over the years. And being away from it made me realize how strong it was. The same thing is happening with Ottawa as well, as I realized that I have really strong ties with Ottawa, and coming back here, I feel very connected with people. So that was my return to Montreal. At that point, it was sort of a creative explosion in terms of new projects. There was a composers forum with a fellow bass player and composer that we set up, and we had different concerts where we invited composers to come in and perform about 2 or 3 a night. There was jazz festival performances. I started touring. I started playing other styles of music besides jazz, so Balkan music, klezmer music, Turkish classical music. Started branching out, lots of folk music. And at the time, I was, one of my roommates is the drummer in Stars, and they were just, it was the early 2000s, they were really starting to pick up. And I was like, wow, this rock music is pretty interesting. And that's where my roots were from when I first started playing bass. So I was like, oh, maybe I can write some indie songs as well. So I started doing that and started a band called Life in Winter in 2007. And we recorded an album. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. So yeah, there's also a great folk community in Montreal and in Ottawa as well. And I was playing with people from those communities and playing country music, but also playing R&B, still playing tons of jazz and lots of other styles of music, which kept it very vibrant and interesting for me. So in university, I had started composition as well. So the great Jan Jarczyk was one of my profs, and rest in peace. And I had a few other profs for composition and learned a lot and really loved it. So I started doing jazz composition at that point, was doing songwriting before that, but then continued after, started a jazz quartet, Sage Reynolds Quartet, and was writing jazz music, and that continued on. We'll talk more about that later. And also, as I said, with the indie project, I was doing songwriting. Also refound my voice, that I was sort of crooning on the cruise ship, but realized that I like to sing in a more natural way, and found my voice, and realized that my voice was actually my first instrument as a child, which for most of us it actually is if you sing when you're a kid, it becomes natural. I sang on to Beatles records. So that's singing. Then, of course, other instruments. If we want to hear about the other instruments I play, we can talk about that later on. And all of that album making, I made an album with the jazz group, I made an album with the indie rock group, led to production. So I was producing those albums, It led to me actually doing the audio editing and arranging in Pro Tools, and learning about mic placement and learning about mixing, mastering. And I'd learned a bit at university as well. So I started to gain confidence to do that on my own as well, and started producing and helping with other people's productions and producing my own projects. And around 2004, when I returned to Montreal, I started teaching more actively as well. I'd always been teaching private study, but then I started teaching at the McGill Conservatory, and then after that at Concordia, which I still teach at. And I find that teaching is a really valuable part of what I do, and it helps me solidify my ideas about my art to explain it to other people, or just even something very basic on how your posture should be when you play. Even though I don't always do as I say when I play, it's talking about being relaxed, and there's a really important ways to make playing an instrument sustainable. And teaching is beautiful, to try to pass on or try to give some people some ideas about how they can not necessarily cut corners, but maybe gain from the wisdom of the mistakes that someone else made, and maybe make a few less mistakes, but still make some mistakes. Got to make mistakes, right? That's how you learn. So I'd already been touring a bit, but around, I guess, 2012, I started to pick up my touring a lot. And I was playing with two groups. Thomas Hellman, who's a folk group, Jordan Officer, blues, rock and roll, guitarist and singer, and bringing me to Europe a lot and around Canada. And that was a big shift for me, and it actually meant that I was doing less small gigs in Montreal, but I really loved it. I really loved traveling and performing in different places. And that was how I was doing all the way up until March 2020, when I was actually in France on tour, and our last two dates of the tour were canceled, and we flew back home on the 15th of March. It was a Sunday, and the next morning everything shut down. So we just squeaked back home, and and everything changed after that. We were. I had, I won't put a figure, but I had a lot of work that was canceled. Everything off my calendar was wiped free, and I could still teach, but there were a lot of things that I couldn't do. So I started to think about the things that I could do. So I started to go back to thinking about production and be more serious about production and songwriting and stuff I could do on my own, and collaborate remotely with other musicians as well. And I started writing songs again for a new folk project, and I found that really, really inspiring and cathartic and healing and helpful during a tough time during the pandemic. And applied for a grant, got a Canada Council for the Arts grant to write some songs, and that project is ongoing now. I'm going to play one of those songs in a bit. And also at the same time, I was researching different production techniques, and I stumbled across, I was actually looking to how to get set up for my gear, and I stumbled across some different, mostly YouTube channels about gear, and it led me to another side of composition that I'd always thought, one day I'd love to write for film, or I'd love to write for video games or for TV. And so I started to explore the world of media composition, which I'll talk about in a bit, and sound design as well. So sound design for theater, meaning composing for a theater piece, but also sound design in the pure sense in terms of actually taking a sound and manipulating it and transforming it into something that's different and sculpting it in a way. I'll talk a bit more about that later. And then through that as well, sampling, which I had actually been sampled a fair amount for different projects, including Amon Tobin's album Foley Room, where I did a whole bunch of extended techniques on double bass, detuned it, and hit it, and did lots of stuff. And he sampled that really closely to get a lot of detail. And I thought it was really interesting, the process, but I was performing a lot, so I never really thought much of it as me as a samplist. But in this new climate of not performing, I was like, wow, I'm going to try this out. And it turns out I was pretty good at it. So I've been doing a lot of sampling lately too. I'll talk a bit about that later. And this year, I moved back to Ottawa. So here I am. I work still in Montreal. I work here. It's great to be back here in two places. But you know, I really feel the connection here in Ottawa to the people, but also the landscape of the Gatineau Hills, and starting to connect with the education community here as well. So, including doing this today. So that's the main roundup there. That's my story. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about bass and other instruments and approaches to playing the instrument and practicing the instrument, and talk a little bit about work, a couple of tidbits, and then we're going to move on to the next section. So talking about bass, I want to give a shout out. Some of my students are actually watching this, so hi students. And I have some really great bass students. Yeah, what I tell them first class, and most of you probably heard this already, is that probably the most important thing to playing an instrument is your health. So if you don't have your health, you usually can't play your instrument. So one of the things that, especially for double bassists, but for many of us, is tendinitis is a big thing that can arise. So I talk with my students about taking it slow, about listening to your body, not playing through pain if you don't have to, or not playing through deep pain. Sometimes we get superficial pain, especially playing that. But you know, is realizing that is the number one important thing. Once that public service announcement is done, which is important, then I get on to, for American music, and I would say American music there's a lot of different things. There's jazz, there's rock and roll, you know, Western music, but not necessarily classical music. One of the most important things is time and groove. So I talk about that. I talk about it developing your metronomic time. So this is working with the metronome so that you can hold tempos in a really steady manner. And then I talk about your feel or your groove. And you get that from playing with other players. You get that from playing along with records, from listening to records, from going to live shows. And you're going to combine those two, your metronomic time and your feel and your groove. And that's what makes good time. That's what we call it, or a good groove. So that's one of the most important things, especially for bass players, but I think it's overlooked by a lot of other instruments, is the way that we interact temporally in terms of time is super important. The way we place ourselves in time relative to the other people we're playing with, relative to an abstract tempo perhaps, or a click track, which is very real when you're in the studio. So those are really important aspects, and it's almost more important than what note you play, whether it's in tune or not. But I would say sound is actually quite important too. For me. For other people it's not, but the actual sound you produce out of your instrument I think is very important, because a lot of the emotional content in instrumental music comes through in the sound of the instrument. Of course, interaction, right? Like, unless we're playing solo, a lot of us, the reason we do this art is so that we can interact with people on stage. We can interact with audience members. We can get that flow of energy happening. So that's super important. And figuring out that aspect and the mechanics of it, how to communicate with each other on a bandstand, in a rehearsal space, in a recording studio, how to communicate with technicians. I was talking earlier about how to be respectful and to realize everyone's working together and you want to have a good time. And that interaction is super important. Now, it seems very obvious, but listening. So we have to listen to ourselves when we're playing. We have to listen to the other people we're playing with, and listen on a deep level. Listen on various levels as well when we're performing. We need some subconscious listening, and where a little alarm bells will go off if certain things start happening. But we also need very focused listening, often on a leader or a soloist or singer if we're backing up a singer. So listening is super important. Also listening to records. And going to live shows is really important, and trying to do as much as you can. We can talk more about it, but I talk about active listening, which is where you're actually breaking down what you're listening to, analyzing maybe the tempo, maybe the time feel, maybe the time signature, maybe the harmonic structure, the lyrics, the melody, and then passive listening, where you have it in your environment where you're playing music, and that's very valuable as well, and that's going to soak in to your subconscious, and all that passive listening, walking down the street, cooking dinner, that's very valuable as well. And I think that if you don't have enough passive listening in your life, I recommend trying to add more. Just even if it's a Bluetooth speaker or something that you can, or headphones, or just try to make it part of your routine that music goes on whenever you can, and listening to different stuff, and that's going to soak in a lot more. And then with media composition, but also with most styles of music, storytelling is really important. So we think about lyrics, we think about, for scoring, it's how we follow the drama in a film or a theater piece. So storytelling and thinking about how you want to tell a story, even instrumentally, is, do you know what the song is about that you're playing? Do you have an emotion that you want to express? What type of story do you want to tell? Are you supporting someone else you're playing with who is needing to express something, and you can help them tell their story at the moment? So storytelling is super important. So there's some various aspects. And then practice, right? Your teachers probably talk to you about this all the time, but there's no way of getting around it, really. And sometimes it's so boring and painful, all those things, but it's super important. And I heard a really good talk about having sort of an automatic work response to things that you don't find enjoyable all the time. Is if you set up a routine and just do stuff, often you'll end up doing what you need to do without thinking about doing it or not. I think a short routine is really important. I talk with my students about at least 3 times a week, just trying to do 20 minutes 3 times a week. 15 minutes, just doing that every 2 days. And you'll see that within a few weeks, even that is huge. And then, of course, a long routine where you get deeper into anything that you're working on is really important. And also jamming. So if you've been working on something in a very sort of mechanical or intellectual way for a while, jam on whatever it was. If you're not an improviser, it maybe means just trying to vary a little bit of what you're doing, or play another piece that you already know, and see how the practice work that you've done in the short term, see how that affects something you already know, and see how your performance capabilities have adjusted or changed. And be patient with yourself, right? People talk about plateaus. It's our perception of our abilities as instrumentalists especially are very skewed and have to do with our self-esteem, and it can be really difficult. So be patient, be kind to yourself, and do what you want to do with music, and go where you want to go. But and don't try to compare yourself too much to other people. Try to think about your own journey with it. Okay, work. A little bit about work. This is a little tidbit that probably in the late 90s we started talking about in my circle of musician friends, is that we would talk about 3 reasons for working. Okay, the most obvious one maybe for a lot of people is money or remuneration. And then maybe for other people it's more obvious that it's the actual music you're playing that is enjoyable and artistically enjoyable, the expression. And then maybe overlooked a lot is the social aspects of working. So it means what we call the hang, how you're getting along with the other musicians, how you're getting along with the client or the other staff at the place you're working at, with the audience members. And that's a very important part of the social aspect. So I got to about 10 years through my career, and I'm at about 25 years now. And I started to get a bit bitter. And I was like, okay, well, what's going on? I have sort of a dream job. Sure, it's really tough a lot of the time, but I really like it. And I really like making music. And so what's the problem here? And I realized that I always needed 2 of those 3 things in order to work, but that the most important thing is actually the social aspect. So feeling like I was respected on the job, feeling like I got along with the people I was making music with, was more important than the other things. So at that point, I amended my rule of 2 of 3 to be 2 of 3, but 1 always had to be that the social aspects were there. And at that point, things became easier. I was less stressed out, less bitter, and things have been a lot more fun since then. It means that sometimes I have to stand my ground a bit in terms of feeling like I'm respected, but I feel better about doing what I'm doing. And it is a very difficult industry to be in. So I think that we got to figure out, if we want to continue doing it, figure out a way to interact with it and to feel okay about doing this. So, you know, and we can, if there's any questions about it, we can get into stagecraft as well. We can talk about, you know, as I said, interacting with technicians, the way you dress. I made a point of wearing a suit today, even though I didn't have to, but it's sometimes you need to dress for the gig you're on and figure out how you're gonna present yourself, depending on the context. So it's a bit old school, but it goes a long way. I think we're moving on to the next section. Yes, we are. So we're going to have a question and answer section a little later on, so if you have any questions about any of that stuff, keep them in mind, and we'll come back to that. And now I'm going to perform one of my new folk songs called Forlorn. Rising sun at their backs, nary a soul forlorn, sure-footed in their tracks. They reached the river by high noon, dove in, slaked their thirst. Downstream log boom, heard the cries, they imagine the worst. Water rushing, big chains rusting, old wood holds you down. They see the place, they see the face, but hear not a sound. They bring the body to the shore, hunched, forlorn. He coughs, shuts death's door. Bright-eyed, they don't have to mourn. the face but hear not a sound. They bring the body to the shore, their shoulders hunched forlorn. He coughs, shuts death's door. Bright-eyed, they don't have to mourn. So that was actually a premiere. First time performing that song, and a little bit of hiccups, but it was super fun, and thanks for being a nice listening audience. And the produced version has mandolin, marimba, guitar, drums, harmony vocals, and a solo version. I got to work on that a little bit more, but it was really fun to play for you. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next section, which is the page in the title. And by page, I mean composition. It's a huge part of what I do. We're going to look at a few of my pieces from various projects, listen to excerpts, and check out the scores a little bit. So, number one is called Saturday Afternoon, and I wrote this piece for my jazz quartet, Sage Reynolds Quartet, in, it looks like, 2005 or 6. And it's actually on the Sage Reynolds Quartet album, which is called On the Wall. And this is one of the pieces that won the Prix d'Étoile Galaxy at the Montreal International Jazz Festival and in 2005. And yeah, it has a sort of a sunny feeling to it. It reminds me of sunny Saturday afternoons as a child. And I'm just going to put down the score for a second. I'm going to start the track, and then we'll put the score back up so we can look along. so that's a little excerpt that we go on to solos. It's a jazz piece, so I think there's 3 solos on there. And play the head out. So as you can see, it's pretty modal harmony. We're in C major, and we're moving down a step to go to the flat 7 major. It gives a nice open sound. There's a lot of common tones between those 2 chords. The A and B are in 3/4 or in 6/8, and then we go into 5/4 on the C section, C and D. So the idea with this composition was to make that transition between the 3 and the 5 as smooth as possible, so that you wouldn't necessarily, as a listener, you wouldn't know that it was changing time signatures, but that feel would happen. Then at E, we go back to the 3/4, and it's actually surprisingly difficult to go from back to 3 once you've been in 5. You want to stay in 5 often. So it's one of the challenges of playing this song was to do that. And you notice the harmony is modal, but it's also it's based a bit on folk music and on popular music as well. And that was a huge influence on me. And also some of the rhythms were influenced by Afro-Cuban music, and some of the bass line was a bit Afro-Cuban inspired as well. That was Saturday afternoon. So a little while after that, I had been playing a lot of Turkish classical music, as I said, and various folk music from different places in the world, other countries, other cultures, and I started to incorporate those into my composition. So this piece is from my group called The Long Drift, and we played some really great shows, and we had violin, guitar, oud, kanun, which is a Turkish zither, percussionist, double bass, and yeah, it was great. We had some excellent concerts, playing my original music as well as some Turkish classical music arrangements we did, and 2 of the musicians were Turkish, and it was great. We had a great time. So I'm going to play this as seen from afar, and then there's a second excerpt as well called Study in Light. So 1 second. Again, some solos, and there's actually an ending where we go into a arpeggiated 8th note pattern in the guitar, and there's some more improvisation from the violinist. That's Joshua Zubat on violin, and Gabriel Lambert on guitar. So this piece, again, it was folk and jazz mixed with music from different world cultures. So it's very folky in terms of the 1/5, 1/4 harmony, and we do actually get a dominant chord here, but I didn't even put the dominant 7 on it. I just make it a regular G triad. So I was simplifying from the jazz side of things. I was writing a lot of different harmony that was more complex, and so when I came to this project, I was trying to simplify it down and get into a different spirit or atmosphere with the music. So again, this one's in 3/4, but quite different. There's also an introduction that I didn't play that has improvised double bass. So that's as seen from afar, and we'll check out another one from the same band, and it's called Study in Light. All right, so that one, another odd time signature that's in 11/8, and the oud and the violin are sharing the melody there. Excellent percussionist, François Taillefer, and it's Ismail Fengioglu is the oud master playing there. And we did do some soloing on that as well, so we kept a bit of the jazz elements of there. This one is very, in terms of the harmony, it's not written on, this is the oud part, but it's very simple harmonically, but rhythmically is what we're going for, the complexity in terms of the melody, is again trying to make it not feel like it's an 11. So there is a clave going underneath with the percussion and the guitar and the bass, but I wanted the melody to go across the bar lines and to not be tied to the clave in the same sort of way, so that the melody could be free. I even got to a point here where I needed to have a bar of 10 in order to make the cadence work the way I wanted to. So sometimes you need to listen to the piece of music and let it be what it's going to be and not try to force it into something that it doesn't sound like how you want it to sound. So there's a case in that one. All right, so moving right along. So now I'm going to play, I don't have a chart for this one because it was oral tradition, right? So getting into indie rock music, folk music, a lot of the times we're dealing with just the lyrics. And if there are parts that need to be played specifically, I will write them out for people, but a lot of the time I'll just demo them and people will learn them by ear. So this is Lone Rider, and it's from Life in Winter. Very different style shift here, so might be a bit louder, we'll see. Right, I wasn't hearing both channels, I don't think, over here. It's hard to hear the lead vocals for some reason. So that's a very different style you can hear. I was actually playing electric guitar on that track, and the lead guitarist was playing bass, which I often like the sound of a guitarist playing bass. He's a great bass player too, Richard White. And for the session for the Life in Winter record, we had Andrew Barr on drums, excellent drummer, and Brad Barr, who was the second guitarist. And the original guitarist came in on one track as well, Gabriel Lambert. The sound engineer, Marcus Paquin, also sang some harmony vocals. You can hear him on that track. I'm singing lead vocals, and then Laurel Sprengelmeyer from Little Scream was also singing harmony vocals. So we had a really nice team at MixArt Studios in Montreal, and it was great to do that album. Very different style. And Marcus co-produced it, but I was the main producer for that one. You know, we can get into lyrics if you want later, but I'm going to move on to the next one. So this is a new folk project, and this is a track called Face the Day. There's lyrics. There's also a marimba part. It was a Canada Council grant that I got to compose with marimba, and I actually took marimba lessons and learned how to play marimba to write these parts, including 4 mallet style. also, I got my friend Josh Zubat to record some violin parts. And I also used some sample instruments that I had built from one in particular that you'll see, if we have time, we'll look at it later, from my double bass called Harmonic Flight. So this is a bit of Face the Day. I'm going to speed it up a little bit right now too, so we'll have a little shorter excerpt, but you'll get to hear a little bit of what this sounds like. So that's Sheena Ko playing the Remember part, and Olaf Gundel is singing harmony vocals. Later he's playing guitar, and that was the core band for this new folk project. So again, very folk-driven harmony, and this song is about a canoe trip, so very Canadian topic. So yeah, and incorporating sample instruments is something that I've been doing recently into my composition and my songwriting. And so last year I was on grant for this, and I wrote a bunch of new material, and hopefully we're going to be making an album of this material soon, including Forlorn that I did earlier. So this year I'm on another Canada Council grant. Thank you, Canada Council. And it's for writing for a string quartet. So that ties into the media composition work that I've been doing and film scoring. And the idea was to improve my orchestration skills and my string writing skills. And yeah, it's been great. Eventually I want to do an album of string quartet music as well. And so I'm going to play a freshly mixed pro demo version of this song, 2 Meters. And you're going to see that this piece ties into the next section. This is the end of this section, but just check it out. Great, so that's the end of the page section. Now we're on to the sonics part. So I talked a bit about media composition, film, TV, video games. Production music is another thing. It's writing music, albums that then you can sell on websites that people can use in a video production, or sometimes on TV shows they'll use production music, and even films. So that's another type of media composition. It is related to sound design for stage as well. There can be some similarities in doing theater music as well. So that's something that I've been starting to do more and more of. And alongside that is also sound design, as I talked about the theater and dance composition aspect, and also building sounds that go along with the drama in terms of theater. But then there's also the pure manipulation of sound, which is sound design in terms of the way you manipulate, you EQ things, you process. And that's very interesting to me. And the idea of finding new sounds that or discovering them almost, because they're all out there, but it's just having an ear to hear something or hear a component of a sound and be able to break down that sound to find what's inside of it and find the hidden gems. So alongside that, and works really well, is once you find those hidden gems, you can actually sample them, create samples, and with those samples, you can compose music, and often you're going to compose music for film or TV. So it's all sort of tied together, these three concepts here. And so I started getting more and more into sampling, and I have been sharing my sample projects on pianobook.co.uk, which is a site for sharing. It's all for free. They're mostly in contact format, but they're also in Decent Sampler, a lot of the instruments, which is a free open source sampler. And so you can share the things you create, and people can use them for their compositions or their songwriting or whatever you want, your productions, whatever you like. So I started getting into that and the idea of building sample instruments. And also for my composition, I started, especially with the string writing, I needed a way to hear what I was writing in a way that, other than just playing it at a piano or playing it on another instrument, is I wanted to be able to hear a mock-up of what I was doing, to hear if it was close to what I wanted. And so I started actually composing using sample libraries and learning how to perform those sample libraries with a MIDI keyboard and an expression controller. So essentially, there's faders that are going to control how the sound fades in and out, the attack, various things you can program. This is a MIDI controller, along with the keyboard, so you can perform what you want. You can also draw in the automation of what other changes to the sound you want. So for that last piece, 2 meters, I composed it. It was for one of the first songs that I composed, not just on an instrument, but in the box in Pro Tools using virtual instruments. So I'm going to open up that session, and we're going to have a look at it, and you'll hear, you're going to be able to hear something that's similar. You're probably going to hear the artificialness, but the idea is often these mock-ups, you're trying to make them as realistic as possible, so a film director will hear what you're doing and get an idea of what it's going to sound like. It's always going to sound different with live musicians, and it's really important to try to get your music played by real musicians, because some stuff is unplayable. So sometimes you want unplayable stuff because it sounds really interesting, but other times, if you want it to be played by live musicians, it's good to get them to test it out to make sure that everything works and that you're not writing too high or too low, or it's not too difficult, for example. So, but this is a mock-up coming up. It's loading, a little slow, but for 2 meters in Pro Tools. All right, so let's see. I think I'm around the start. Oh, got to stop that. So it gives you an idea. So essentially, you have recordings of those string instruments that are then being played through a sampler. In this case, I mostly use Contact. And this is a solo string, a legato, violin. And, so you're going to be using those sounds, performing them into your session to get an idea of what your music's going to sound like. You can also bounce out your MIDI into a score afterwards. You still have to do some copying work and editing of the score, but it is a way to compose when you don't have a string quartet or an orchestra or whatever other instruments on hand. So that's a mock-up there for 2 meters. So moving on is, now the next one is going to, it's called Season Shift. And it's going to include some of my sampling and sound design work, as well as production and live performances that I do on it. So I'm going to open up that session 1 second. So the main instrument you're hearing is the marimba that I had in my home studio. And I bowed it with my double bass bow, and I took that sound that I had recorded, and I cleaned it up and did some processing to it, and created a sample instrument, and then performed that. Right here, this session, I've actually bounced out all the MIDI, but if you look over here, each one of these tracks, besides the live ones, had a MIDI track, which is this little keyboard symbol, and then I have some live double bass here, a couple different versions of myself, and some low notes and some pizzicato. And I also used Philip Glass's piano that was sampled recently, and called the Glass Piano, to play some piano material. So we'll listen to a bit of that. So you can see it's in what I call a cinematic style. You can imagine that possibly being a cue for a film. and it's incorporating live double bass as well as the sampled marimba, sampled piano. Moving on with sampling, one of the instruments I created was high harmonics on the double bass that I recorded and turned it into an instrument called Harmonic Flights. It was very popular on Piano Book. Spitfire Audio ended up making a free labs instrument. I'm going to play a 1-minute excerpt from that. So this is, on Spitfire Audio. It's free, and they have like around 50 or 60 of these free instruments, and this is one of them. So actually, in this one, I actually have the MIDI up, and the bounced audio is muted, so you'll be able to hear directly what the MIDI is sounding like. Start that again. It actually starts over there. So again, this is all actually using different versions of the same instrument. Some of them have been, sound design work has been done. I've run the instrument through various guitar pedals and various effects, and then use the various versions, which are all presets within the instrument. Looks like this, and there's a bunch of different presets for the instrument, so different sounds essentially, and so I used just that instrument to do this composition. So, and then we got the last one, and then we're going to move on to the next section, which is John is going to come up, and we're going to talk a bit and some questions, and hopefully do some playing as well. And we'll definitely do some playing. So, thanks so much. And the last piece I'm going to play is actually a video that I put together with a piece I composed with one-shot samples for something called Beattober, which is a community. This guy Tetro, producer out of LA. It's a fundraising project he's doing for October for charity. And the idea was to create one sample. A bunch of people created samples, and then you write a track using those samples. So if you have more questions about it, I'm just going to play it now to keep things moving. But if you have more questions, we can talk about that later. But here goes. It's called On the Wing. It also, it's also on Instagram and YouTube if you want to watch it and pause it to see what's written, because it's actually a bit difficult to see what's written. It describes how I made this sample and composed the track. All right, that's it for that the sonic section. And now I'd like to invite John up for the next part of the presentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Sage. I really appreciate it. That was wonderful. Great. I'm thinking in the interests of time, I wonder if we should combine interview questions where I can bring a few out with Q&A.
Sure.
Yeah, I think just that might be a better way to do it at this point. Can we take some questions from the audience first? Way at the back. You're going to have to be loud. Yep.
I noticed that when you were talking about technical playing, like ergonomically aligning yourself with the bass, you said that there were two types of strain, mostly one that's more of a wear and tear and one that's superficial. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. So many string instruments, especially double bass, they have a superficial wear and tear that happens in terms of building calluses, right? So left hand and right hand, and depending on the makeup of your body, it can be really tough actually on the skin. And I actually had to build up a lot of scar tissue on my fingers over the years playing double bass in order to be able to play it without pain on a superficial level. So that is an unfortunate part of it. If that's too intense, then there's other instruments that don't have that issue to them, but they might have other issues, other painful aspects about them. But then for any instrument, what I was talking about is a deeper pain, meaning if you feel something inside your forearm, or something, it could be in your neck if you're a violin player, or it could be in your back. And depending on your instrument, it's going to be in different places. But if you feel some sort of deep nagging pain that doesn't really go away and doesn't feel like it's superficial, then that's an issue. And as soon as you're feeling anything like that, I recommend just stopping playing right away. And I tell my students, even in the middle of a performance, if you need to, if it's that painful, because if it does turn into tendonitis, then you have to take at least 6 weeks off, and you can have many problems. So most people I know have actually had tendonitis at one point in their careers. So it is avoidable. And knock on wood, I haven't had it yet. So listening to my body and knowing when to take breaks. Also trying to play as relaxed as possible. It's not always possible. You get into something and you want to push a little bit, but trying to get back to a relaxed state of playing as much as possible. And those are the two ideas. I heard some stat, and this is not official stat, but I heard that maybe 40% of musicians play in pain. So I'm not sure, maybe amongst yourselves you can talk about it, but it's figuring out, okay, well, how much pain can we handle? What type of pain is it? And is it going to stop us from making more music? And if you are damaging yourself on a deep level, it is eventually going to stop you from making music. So you need to figure out a way to do it so it's sustainable.
I can confirm. I actually have tendonitis right now.
Okay.
And it's very much interfering with what I can do. I'm going to turn the floor over to Matt.
Hello. Earlier you mentioned the difference between short and long practice or something like that. Can you just elaborate on those ideas? What is that? What's it for?
Yeah, so when I talk about short routines, I usually talk about something technical. So you could be working on an arpeggiated 7-chord on a mode or a scale, often with a metronome. You could be working on trills. You could be working on something technical. And I think about it in short chunks, so maybe 5 or 10 minutes on each element. And you can put short chunks of 5 or 10 minutes together, 2 or 3 of them together to get 15 to 30 minutes. And if you put a few different elements together, you get a short routine where you're practicing something technical, you mix it up. So you put some detailed work in, but then mix it up and keep on moving. So it becomes less of a grind. Of course, to get really inside certain technical aspects of playing an instrument, you need to spend more time on one thing and really get inside. For double bass, I spend a lot of time working with a tuner, even working with a mirror to look at my technique. So you do have to, or if there's a certain sound that you're struggling with, you know, the half whole diminished scale. Then you might have to practice for more than 20 minutes on that given sound. But the idea is that if you just, the idea is just practicing. And a lot of time we think that we need to practice, you know, an hour, 4 hours, 6 hours a day or whatever, you know, whatever this ideal of practicing is supposed to be, is that yes, you can do that. And most musicians have a period in their life when they practice a lot. And for me, it was at university, and a lot of people it is, but sometimes that's overwhelming, the idea of all this practicing that you need to do to get in your hours on an instrument. So if it's becoming overwhelming, one idea is to just take the pressure off and think about smaller chunks, but regular. So every couple of days. And if you're getting 3 of those in a week, is, you know, of course it's better than nothing, but it's surprising the amount of improvement you'll see in just short practice routines regular, as opposed to not playing at all or performing and then once a week shedding for like 6 hours or whatever, you know. So you're actually going to get better results from shorter periods, more regular. And it's the way we learn, it's the way we remember stuff, and it's the way that we build our muscle memory as well. And of course those long periods are important, and if you can build up to longer chunks, you're going to get more out of it. But it's actually really amazing how much you can get out of a short routine. Does that answer the question?
Great. I think we might have time for one more question before we move on to the coaching session. And way up at the back and loud, and if you like, I'm going to run the mic up to you. Not going to make you shout. There you go, Sitalia.
Some cardio right there, right? Anyway, as a multi-instrumentalist, how often do you practice each instrument? How long do you spend on it, on your non-primary instruments? And how long did it take you to learn each?
Okay, great question. So the most amount of hours I put in is a double bass. So I've been playing that for, almost 30 years, I guess. And at the beginning, I was putting in several hours a day for the first few months, and I slowly built up to playing more hours a day. And then around university, I was practicing between 2 and 4 hours a day, and then performing for around 4 hours a day as well. So it was pretty much a full-time job, and I was trying to get my schoolwork done at the same time. So it was a very hectic time. So that was something an instrument that I wanted to be my main instrument and wanted to play it at a certain level. So that was that instrument. Electric bass, I did a similar thing, not as many hours, and it's changed a lot over the years. And electric bass now, I perform a lot when I teach on it, and the projects I do play in, I touring, I play electric bass often, and yeah, I did a lot of work on electric bass actually early on, and that work actually carried me through. So that was a similar thing where I was up to maybe 4 hours a day of electric bass when I was first getting into it, plus performance, and then that waned back, and the muscle memory is there. So the upkeep is usually through teaching and preparing for a gig. I'll usually do enough playing that my muscle memory will be back. So there's an upkeep sort of practice that happens that depends on my activity. That's for all of my other instruments, guitar included. Guitar is mostly only in my own projects, sometimes in other people's projects, but I'll only really practice the music I'm going to play. So I'll be composing on guitar, or I'll be playing someone else's music, and the practicing that I do is to learn that music, and that's how I improve at those instruments. Marimba, the last year in 2021, I did some rudiment work. And that was fun because it was like learning a new instrument and as part of a grant. So I had the time to do that in a different way. And that, I was doing a few hours a day of that, but I wasn't trying to push it. It was very different too. I didn't want to hurt myself, and I was mostly using it for composition again. So, and then piano, I can't measure it, but I play piano every day. And mandolin hardly ever. But anyways, a lot of different instruments. But my point is that if you have the time, you can put as many hours as you want into as many different instruments. But at a certain point, you do sort of need to choose what your main ones are going to be. I did a lot of practicing my voice at a certain point. Worked with vocal coaches and many hours a day, and because I wanted to improve that. Same thing, double bass. I put in a lot of effort into that because it's my main instrument. But other instruments, it doesn't have to be stressful. You can practice when you want, and you can use it for different purposes. It doesn't need to be. You don't need to be a virtuoso on everything, or on anything for that matter. But it's really what you want and the time that you have. But that's how many hours I put into my instruments. And a lot of the times it's double bass now. It's really maintenance practicing. So what I talked about is it's really the short routine. It's preparing for a gig. It's composing. But I don't put in those big long sessions that I used to when I was first learning the instrument. And I find that the muscle memory stays. And yeah, does that answer the question? Okay. But I have, and to be completely honest, is I have spent about at least 10,000 hours on that one. So that, after you spend that much time with an instrument, it's very ingrained. And, sometimes if I don't play it for a while, I need to get back into it. But I was very lucky to have the time to do that. And a university degree is very useful for trying to find the time to do stuff like that. So.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Sage, and thanks for the questions. They're great. Now we're going to move on to the coaching section, and if we could have the sax quartet first, please. And with these, we're gonna actually have to keep the sessions as tight as we can. I really hate to rush, but we need to keep our eye on the clock a little bit. Great. Thanks so much.
Hello. Hello. Hi. Beautiful. Yeah, really great playing. Love the blend of the four you have, like the blend of your tones, great intonation, really great sound individually, and blended well really nicely together as well. So, like, great instrumental work, listening to each other, it's very important. And the only thing I would say to work on is what I talked about earlier, is the groove aspect. So there's a couple different things. It's about grooving as a group and feeling the same sort of pulse. It's about having roles, maybe. So some of you take on certain roles, but realizing that the responsibility is with everyone for a groove. So, you could work with a click just to see how that feels. Individually work on your own time, then come together, bring that. It's really important during solos too, is that when someone sort of breaks off and starts to solo, they do have to be responsible for the time, but also everyone else needs to sort of double down on the support so that the soloist has the freedom to be a little bit more, to break up the rhythm a little bit more and to still feel that groove. So that would be the main thing, but other than that, really beautiful playing and really great tone and great sound. And who wrote the piece?
Ed Kelly.
Ed Kelly, cool. Yeah, very cool piece too. And that's so that's it. It's we're feeling a certain type of rhythm there. There's a certain type of groove. So it's maybe checking out where those rhythms came from and listening to that music to hear how that feels when a full percussion ensemble is playing those type of rhythms, and playing along with those grooves might actually help and deepen the groove. But really beautiful playing. Thank you.
Thanks, Saxophone Quartet. That was wonderful. And if we could now have Ariana and Trinity, please. That would be great.
You'll need to switch on the mic too.
I'm Mariana, and this is Trinity, and today we'll be singing an original song of mine called Live. Once upon a time, I let you into my life, and it felt so good until it wasn't. You said all the right things in the beginning, then it went downhill from there. Red flags everywhere. Why do you lie? Why do you lie?
Beautiful. Great, really nice song. Great singing too. I love the timbre of your voice and the choices you make in terms of, can hear a bit of your influences, so that's cool. And the way you affect your voice is you do it in a very natural way, and it sounds like the way you want to sing. It sounds very natural. Beautiful piano playing too, and nice even tempo, nice tone, nice and soft to fit the atmosphere of the song. Yeah, it's great. There's so much amazing music that is super soft these days. Like, think of Billie Eilish, of course, who's like singing at the edge of silence. So that style of music, I love that, where you hear all this different tone and texture when you're really quiet. So getting into that is amazing. I think while you're studying, it's good to also explore maybe extremes in the other way, into a more belting style or different ways. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the direction that you would go as a singer or as a piano player, you know. But it can be interesting to do that, and then come back to your what you feel and how you want to perform, and see how it's different. See how certain phrases feel once you've done something in a different way, and how your support is going to be different maybe as well from singing. I definitely know that I like to sing very quietly, but I also sang really loud for a long time too, and it sort of, for better or for worse, it just helped me understand the difference more and helped me with just control my voice a bit more when I wanted to. But I love the super quiet, like edge of silence thing is amazing and very emotional too. So congrats.
Great, thanks. And if we could have Vince and Joel and Mark up. Great, thanks.
Hey guys. Good. How are you guys doing? Good.
Just so you know who's who, Vince on piano, Mark on bass, and Joel on drums.
So I'll let you guys start, and then maybe I can jump in for a little bit. We can sort of trade off a bit on something. All with me? Okay, great. Great. Maybe at some point I can do a bit of walking and a bit of soloing at some point. Just give me a sign when you want to switch over, and then we'll go back to you for the end. Thanks so much. Thanks to John and the technical team. Thanks to the other John for the invite to be here. And thanks to all of you for being here and for doing this masterclass with me. It was really a pleasure. So this is a great band. There's a great groove going on. There's nice hookup. There's great soloing. You know, like, not much to say there. It's just keep on grooving together and playing as much as you can, and individual practice, and then just jam as much as you can. Listen to as much stuff together. Listen to our albums together and break it down. Active listening together, passive listening together. Go to shows, go to jam sessions, and just keep on swinging. But great job. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for, who played today, and thanks to Sage for this wonderful presentation. Really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. Before we finish up today, don't forget that you need to sign out for your attendance, and also, very importantly, don't forget that you need to relax during reading week. All right, have a great one, folks. Take care.